Dr. Ross, thank you so much for joining us for today's discussion. We're really thankful that you get to sit down with us for a little while today.
Well, thank you for coming here. It makes it convenient for me.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, so for our viewers, we were able to fly out here to California and spend some time with Dr. Ross, and we're really excited for this conversation because we've had Dr. Ross on a few times, and every video has been great. We've learned a lot from Dr. Ross, and so we really wanted to dig a little bit deeper into some of the theology that we've learned from Dr. Ross. And so, Nick, do you want to kick us off with...
on our, just to give you a little bit of background, on our YouTube page, we have like a science and creation category, and we just recently had a debate with Michael Jones
from Inspiring
on evolution, theistic evolution, and Eric Hovind. And we had some young Earth and old Earth talks on there with you. And we had some really good feedback from the audience. And we figured, why not come here and talk to you face to face?
Sounds good.
And get these things going, right? Get this conversation moving. And one of the things that that young Earth creationists and other people that are questioning, right? They often question the death and decay before the fall. That's something that we get a lot, especially in the debate that you had with Eric Hovind. He mentioned that often. And we'd love to give you an opportunity to talk on that. And how do you reconcile death and decay before the fall?
Yeah, that's actually a bigger issue with the young Earth creationists in the age of the Earth. You know, why would all-loving God have animals dying before the fall of Adam? But what you see in the Bible is that when it talks about the death that Adam introduced, it's limited to human beings. Like Romans 5:12, death through sin was visited upon all people. There's only one species that can experience sin here on earth, and that's human beings. And notice that Paul gives a second qualification, death to all people. He doesn't say death to all life. And that's repeated in 1 Corinthians 15, 20 to 22, where he again says that the sin that Adam committed brought death to all humans. So there's no mention anywhere in the Bible that Adam's sin brought death to plants and animals or bacteria or fungi. And when I've debated young Earth creationists, they frankly admit that, yes, you're right. The Bible does not mention it. But they say the fact that the Bible is silent on the issue doesn't mean it did not happen. But I've also observed that this is a debate that predominantly takes place amongst people who live in big cities. If you're out in a rural area, people recognize the benefit of carnivorous activity. They recognize the benefit of parasites and of detritivores. It's all crucial for the balance of life. And so, I mean, they're all focused on, well, wouldn't there be greater death and suffering? Actually, you get enhanced death and suffering of the herbivores if you take away the carnivores. And the problem is we're looking at this from a human perspective. When we hunt, we kill the very best animals in the herd. We're the only carnivore that has that luxury. Other carnivores basically are designed. I mean, God has designed the ecosystem in such a way that the carnivores can only kill the weak, the sick, the dying, the diseased, the injured, and the healthy ones are able to escape. So, and what this does is actually maintains the health in the population of the herbivore herds. And there's been many field experiments where their carnivores, by some reason, are taken away. And when that happens, disease multiplies in the herbivore community, and the death rate skyrockets. So you actually get greater death and suffering. Now, I've run into some young Earth creationists who say, well, maybe before the fall of Adam, we had different laws of physics, where you don't have to worry about thermodynamics. But the Bible's quite clear. The laws of physics have not changed. I mean, you got Jeremiah 33, where God says, hey, you can trust me. My promises are secure. I'm a God that's immutable. I don't change. As proof, look to the laws that govern the heavens and the earth. As they have not changed, I have not changed. And that statement about the constancy of the laws of physics you'll find in Revelation, Genesis, Ecclesiastes, Romans. It's repeated several times. It's also something we astronomers can prove by direct observations. So, for example, when we look at a star or a galaxy, the light that we see had to travel through space to get to us, which means we're seeing the condition of that star and galaxy when the light left that star or galaxy. And we look at stars and galaxies with spectroscopes, we're measuring the laws of physics when the light left that star or galaxy. And we've got literally millions of measurements of spectra of stars and galaxies that verify the laws of physics have not changed all the way back to the cosmic creation event. And we can measure that now in some cases to 17, 18 place of the decimal. In fact, I use that as proof that the Bible is the inspired, inerrant Word of God. Thousands of years ago, the Bible said no change in the laws of physics. Today, astronomers can prove that what the Bible predicted about science indeed is correct.
Interesting. So I think that's great evidence. When we look at I know you've spoken about the book of creation, or the book of nature, I'm sorry.
Right.
And how God speaks to us through that as well as the Bible. One question that we constantly get in the same topic is about Romans 8.
Yes.
And if you don't mind, I'm going to read starting in verse 18. It says, "For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God.
Right.
For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to decay and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God." Now, this is pretty much what everybody talks about right here, verse 22. "For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now." And I think that most people will say, well, decay and death couldn't have entered into the world because Romans 8 is clearly saying that.
Read the 23rd verse, because that really helps.
It says, "For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now." And 23, "And not only the creation, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies."
Correct. Okay, what's going on there is that Romans 8 is telling us that God purposely subjected the entire creation, the whole universe, to this pervasive law of decay, referring to the second law of thermodynamics, which you see in the book of Ecclesiastes. Everything is undergoing decay. And that's crucial for God as a tool that he uses to eradicate evil. I mean, I've written in my book, Why the Universe is the Way It Is, that for the efficient removal of evil and rapid removal of evil, it's crucial that the universe be governed by gravity, electromagnetism, thermodynamics, and the strong and weak nuclear force. What you see there in verse 23 of Romans 8, these laws will remain in effect until the full number of humans that God intends to redeem have been redeemed. Then we get new laws of physics. We get new laws of physics because evil is no longer a factor. And when you look at Revelation 21 and 22, it tells us in the new creation, there will be no gravity, there will be no thermodynamics, there will be no electromagnetism. That's because evil is no longer a possibility. And to put this in context, there's multiple passages in the Bible that say God begins his works of redemption before he creates anything at all, which implies God knew that sin and evil would come into his creation. And you say, well, couldn't a God created things so that wouldn't happen? Well, we're told in the Bible that God created to expand the expression of his love, which meant he purposely created beings with free will. Now, he could have created us humans with a weak free will, where very few of us would rebel against him. But he wanted strong love relationships. Strong love relationships means he creates beings with strong free will. So a strong free will you will find angels and humans rebelling against God. But God already had set up the physics of the universe in advance so that when this happened, he could use the laws of physics as an efficient, rapid tools in his hands to eradicate evil and once and for all. So I think that's the interpretation of Romans 8. And I actually quote this text and make the point. This is one of the passages that says the laws of physics have not changed, and they will not change until God's work of redemption is finished.
So I know that you're not, from what I understand, you can correct me if I'm wrong, you wouldn't consider yourself a theistic evolutionist?
No.
Okay. And why is that?
Yeah.
Well, it's for two reasons. I don't think there's any way that the Bible would permit a theistic evolutionary interpretation of the origin and history of life, especially of human beings.
Mm-hmm.
And the scientific record backs that up. I mean, I just finished writing a book called Rescuing Inerrancy. And it's basically a response to theistic evolutionists who are saying, hey, the science is basically forcing us to reinterpret the Bible. And what I pointed out in this book I just finished is that, wait a minute, this is coming from theologians who really haven't studied the science, especially the latest science. And I can see why they drew this conclusion based on papers that were published 10, 20, 30 years ago. So what I did in the book is say, hey, here's the latest science. And a lot of it's been driven by the fame of Francis Collins.
Mm-hmm.
He was the one that founded BioLogos,
Right.
which is promoting a theistic evolutionary perspective. I've known Francis. I mean, I appreciate his Christian character. In fact, what I really liked about Francis is that he came to us and said, you know, you had reasons to believe, take a very different view than we do at BioLogos, scientifically and biblically. How about if we write a two views book where we lay out where we agree and where we disagree, but we do it in a very charitable manner? Because his concern, I agreed with him, is when you get onto science faith issues in the Christian community, the debates can get very hostile and vindictive.
Yeah.
And we said we need to model a different way. And so the book that we wrote with BioLogos, the differences are clear. And in fact, I thought what was quite interesting is we assumed that we would differ on the science more than the Bible. It's the other way around. We differ more in the Bible than we did the science.
Interesting.
But I do think it basically does give an example to the Christian community. Hey, we can disagree and disagree sharply, but we can do it in Christian love and charity, and we're called to. I mean, non-Christians watch how we treat one another. And if we're vicious towards one another, they're going to say, I want nothing to do with those people that call themselves Christians. So
Yeah.
that's one point I admire. But what I saw with all these theologians, they said, they had such high respect to Francis. They said, he's got to be right. We can't be descended from just two human beings. It's got to be a population of 10,000, although lately they've lowered that number. But I basically made the point in Rescuing Inerrancy, if you actually look at the science, the scientific papers, it sustains the fact that we're all descended from one man and one woman. You do run into a problem if you try to make Adam and Eve as recent as 6,000 years ago. But as I look at Genesis chapter 2, it's clear to me it's referring to the Garden of Eden during the last ice age, because it talks about 4 rivers coming together in the Garden of Eden. The rivers are named. The text tells us where the rivers flow from. They're easy to identify. 2 are dry today, but during the last ice age, all 4 would have been flowing rivers. And the only place they come together is the southeastern portion of the Persian Gulf, which is now more than 200 feet below sea level. But during the last ice age, it would have been above sea level, because then the sea levels were 300 to 400 feet lower than they are today. So, and I think what's fascinating, and this is part of the debate we have with BioLogos, is that when you look at the genetic data, you get a rough date for the origin of humanity 150,000 years ago, plus or minus 150,000 years. But Genesis 2 actually gives you a more accurate date. Sometime during the last ice age, which would be 14,000 to 120,000 years ago. And with carbon-14, we can push, we know from carbon-14, humans have been here at least 40,000 years. So 40 to 120,000 years ago. And with that date range, there's no problem with the genetics. You can easily have the entire human species descended from one man and one woman, especially if God created Eve with distinct reproductive eggs. I mean, when a woman is born, the eggs are there intact, and I can easily see God creating Eve with genetically distinct eggs, and I think that's verified in the biblical text. Because notice, there's no prohibition against brother-sister marriages until you get to the book of Exodus. Basically saying there's no genetic risk in those early generations of humanity.
Interesting. So is one of your pushbacks then that theistic evolution requires that there's other humans on the earth already when we get to the Adam and Eve story?
Yes, they do require that Adam and Eve would not be alone.
Right.
Although there are others who make the point, well, if we push Adam back far enough back in time, like 1 million to 2 million years ago.
Into Neanderthal, right? Are you talking about William Lane Craig's book?
Well, he's not alone. I mean, in
Yeah.
fact, what I find interesting is that we had reasons to believe, seem to be alone amongst science faith organizations in saying Neanderthals are not human. Homo erectus is not human. The Denisovans are not human.
Yeah.
And in fact, one of the chapters I put in Rescuing Inerrancy was basically making the point, again, based on an extensive survey of the scientific literature. It's clear that Neanderthals are distinct species from humans. They did not have the image of God. They did not have symbolic capability. Their anatomy was quite different. I think the problem is people kind of look from the neck down, and even there you got differences because the legs and arms of Neanderthal are shorter. The body is barrel-shaped. Neanderthals are basically designed for a cold climate. But when you look at the head, that's where you really see the big differences. With Neanderthal, an enormous nasal capacity, essential if you're going to be warming up cold air without clothing. And the brain structure is different. A lot of theistic evolution says, well, look, the brain weight of Neanderthals is the same as us humans. Well, that's correct, although the brain of the Neanderthal is having to manage a much more massive body. And so it's really the ratio of the weight of the brain to the body. But the really big difference, humans have a globular brain. Neanderthals have a cylindrical brain. Humans have a huge parietal lobe. The Neanderthals don't. It's the parietal lobe in your brain that allows you to do mathematics, philosophy, theology, and physics, and symbolic capability. And then the other thing we notice is the human brain has a much higher number of neurons. The neuronal density in the human brain is considerably greater than it is for the Neanderthal brain. In fact, when you compare the Neanderthal brain to the human brain, there's about a dozen distinct differences between the two brains. And so, you know, I remember debating a theistic evolutionist just a few weeks ago, as a matter of fact, and they said, well, look at the fact that Neanderthals put scratches on a cave wall. Isn't this like an alphabet? Didn't they have writing capability? Well, I've seen the photograph of it. It's some just simple lines. There's several lines going this way, one line going this way. I've seen bears with their claws make similar. And we don't attribute symbolic capability to a bear scratching on a cave wall or a tree. So,
well, you mentioned that they'll argue that brain weight is significant, and we're treading into waters that I had known nothing about. Couldn't you say that the brain weight of a human is equal to any number of animals in the animal kingdom, or is it actually significant?
Well, I mean, what really counts is the neuronal density, the structure of the brain, you know, how it's structured inside the skull, and the weight of the brain relative to the body.
Okay.
And so that's called the encephalization ratio. So, that's the ratio of the brain weight to the body weight. Another factor, too, is how much of your blood supply supports the brain.
Okay.
Now, your brain weighs 3 pounds. We weigh, 150, maybe 200 pounds. But 35% of your blood flow supports the brain.
Okay.
So the brain is really consuming a huge amount of the energy that you take in every day. And that's because it's doing so much more than the brain in a dog or a brain in a chimpanzee.
Yeah.
Or a brain in a Neanderthal. So,
To tie it all together.
Yeah, right.
We were talking, so you brought up the culture when it comes to conversations with theology and science and stuff. We were talking a little bit on the way over here about that. What were you saying about that?
Yeah, so you were singing my song when you said that Christians need to be more charitable to one another. Man, it's kind of like what we represent as a ministry. Bible Dingers wants to exist to bridge the gap and cause Christians to talk to each other and not just about each other. So often in the social media and YouTube world, people just love to make reaction videos. And I'm not saying those are wrong per se, but a lot of times they just keep making reaction videos without actually having conversations.
there's a reason why that's happening, because I've noticed that with the internet, is as the internet becomes more pervasive, it becomes it's more divisive, more vindictive in the language. And that's because the internet is set up in such a way to reward those kinds of reactions.
The algorithm,
And so if you're gentle and kind, you're not going to get the responses.
Yeah.
All you need to do is make some really outrageous political statement.
Exactly.
And you're going to get millions of views, right?
That's true.
Yeah, that's probably why we don't have millions of views.
That's probably it.
Well, that's why we lag behind the other science-based organizations, because we have a commitment here to Reasons to Believe. Our core values: gentleness, respect, humility, and boldness. And so that's not going to help you on the internet.
Yeah. So that's my question. Are there missed opportunities in Christendom as a whole? Maybe you can even speak to yourself. Are there some things we can do better?
Well, here's the missed
to not
opportunity.
do that, right?
2 Corinthians 5 says that we who are followers of Jesus Christ are Christ's ambassadors. An ambassador is a diplomat. The ambassador represents, a certain kingdom. And so we're representing the kingdom of God, and we're calling people to join that kingdom. And what 2 Corinthians 5 is telling us is that unbelievers are watching us. And if they see Christian demeanor being manifested amongst us, they're going to be more willing to trust us and dialogue with us. On the other hand, if we're tearing one another apart in very vicious ways, they're going to say, they're just like us.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we're not going to talk to them.
Yep.
And so we need to realize that we're being watched. And I like what the Apostle Paul said. It says, divisions amongst you are good. It's essential that we agree on what's important for salvation. But if we're agreeing on everything, it means we're not really digging into the Word and trying to figure out what it's saying to us. So, as the founder of Reasons to Believe, I purposely hired people that disagree with me.
I like that.
Yeah, if they all agree with me and they're all yes people, I'm not going to be corrected on things where I make mistakes.
Yeah.
So, but it's the way we disagree. And so what I've been sharing with people in the Christian community, if it's not in the creeds of the church, don't fight over it. But if it's not in the creeds of the church, you should vigorously debate it. And part of that is that we're reaching out to different kinds of unbelievers, and so it's important there be some diversity within the body of Christ, so they can find a place where they feel at home.
Yeah, and that's something we stand for. Typically, we come from the Reformed background. I was raised Reformed Baptist my whole life. And as we grow and study, we just love to have fellowship with people that have different views because we don't want to be biased on our doctrine. We just want to make sure that we are reading the scriptures properly with proper hermeneutic and studying ourselves approved before the Lord. And so often we corner ourselves with our doctrine, and we don't do that. We don't continue to study. We become okay with our bias and without challenging ourselves properly. And I think that's what we want our listeners to do, is challenge ourselves. Matter of fact, probably last year or so, we went, me and an unbeliever friend, thank God he went with me, went to go see Frank Turek. And I really wanted to present to him what the gospel was and who God is and if God is real and stuff like that. And one of Frank Turek's arguments was the fine-tuning argument, and that's something that you use often as well. And him and I were talking in the car, and he had a good follow-up question with that as well.
Yeah, so I totally am on the train that fine-tuning absolutely points to a God. But the question is, how do you go from a God creating the universe to the God of the Bible creating the universe?
Great question. The fine-tuning argument has been the go-to scientific argument for the God of the Bible since the birth of the church. I mean, if you read church history, it's not the only scientific argument we have, but it's the one that seems to have the biggest impact. And I launched Reasons to Believe with that in mind. I've actually written 7 full-length books on fine-tuning, really addressing your question. How do we get from deism to theism?
Right.
How do we get from theism to the God of the Bible? And you don't even need the fine-tuning to get to deism. The space-time theorems tell us there has to be a causal agent beyond space and time that created the universe. And what I've noticed is even amongst atheist physicists and astronomers today, they're accepting deism. They don't call themselves deists, but they say, yeah, we can't deny that there's some kind of causal agent beyond space and time that created everything, which is actually a very good definition of deism.
Yeah.
But I notice that they vigorously debate me on this idea, is there a personal entity in that causal agent? And this is where the fine-tuning argument really has great power, because you're basically demonstrating we can measure the degree of fine-tuning. And we see it not just in 5 or 6 parameters. We see it in several hundred parameters, over 1,000 parameters show fine-tuning. And we can demonstrate that the fine-tuning is many, many orders of magnitude greater than the fine-tuning that we humans are capable of in our engineering designs, in our inventiveness. In fact, what I've been doing in my books is saying we can actually put numbers on this. So even with just saying one fine-tuning characteristic of the universe, I was able to show the level of fine-tuning we're seeing there is a trillion times greater than the very best example of human fine-tuning.
Wow.
Which implies that the one that designed that, just that one parameter, forget the other 1,000, just that one parameter, it must be a being that's that many times, 10 to the 96 times, more intelligent, more knowledgeable, more creative, more powerful than we human beings. And then when you look at the gods of the other major religions of the world, what you notice is it's the God of the Bible that's really intimately involved with his creation to a very high degree. And so fine-tuning basically tells you we're not dealing with the God of Hinduism or Buddhism or Islam. This is the God of the Bible. Now, the greater challenge is, how do you get from theism to the God of the Bible? And my second to last book was called Design to the Core, and the entire book is focusing on that very issue, how the fine-tuning identifies Jesus Christ as the fine-tuner. In the context of what I've already said, the Bible says repeatedly, God begins his works of redemption before he creates anything at all, which would imply that everything that God creates is for the purpose of redemption. And what I basically argued in Design to the Core, the fine-tuning says that every component of the universe as a whole and all of its subcomponents, all the events that took place in the history of the universe, our galaxy, our solar system, our planet, our moon, each one plays a role in making possible the redemption of billions of human beings. And if it wasn't fine-tuned to that degree, the redemption of human beings would not be possible. So the fact that we see fine-tuning that's necessary to the degree that we measure, that makes possible the redemption of billions of human beings, that's the Christian faith. You don't see that in the non-Christian religions. You don't see that in the cults. It's unique to Christianity. So it's kind of like what Job said. Job didn't have scripture, yet notice Job was able to just look at the record of nature and realize there's an advocate that will make a bridge between me and God, and he recognized the advocate was his Redeemer.
Yeah.
And he put his faith and trust in the Redeemer.
Yeah.
So
you basically summed it up and said that Christianity as a religion is the only religion that really makes sense.
it's the only religion that fits the fine-tuning evidence that we see. Now, that does mean that you have to be fairly diligent in the fine-tuning. I mean, I've got over 50 books on fine-tuning in my library upstairs, almost all of them written by unbelievers. And the problem is they only look at a few fine-tuning parameters. What we've done at Reasons to Believe is say, look, we're going to try to make an exhaustive survey of the scientific literature and realize we're not just talking a dozen or so. We're talking over 1,000 fine-tuned features. And moreover, the degree of fine-tuning that we see goes up. We've been actually able to measure it. It gets about a factor of 1,000 times stronger every month. And I've spoken on many university campuses about fine-tuning, saying, if you're not persuaded today, wait 30 days.
That's crazy.
If in the scientific literature you come up with a case that's 100 to 1,000 to 10,000 times stronger than what you got today, you need to seriously consider the claims that Jesus Christ has on your life.
Yeah.
So the fine-tuning argument makes sense with the Christian God.
Yes.
But we inevitably will have to go to the Bible for answers. So how do you then convince people that the Bible is true after you show them the evidence that the Christian God is true?
Well, what we see in the Belgic Confession, Article 2, God's given us two books of revelation, the book of nature and the book of Scripture. But it makes the point that the book of Scripture is more specific about the attributes of the Creator. And so that's kind of our mission here at Reasons to Believe, to introduce people to the book of nature and use that introduction to bring them to the book of Scripture and into a relationship with Jesus Christ. So the fine-tuning is a good way to get their attention, saying, hey, this really is the God of the Bible. The other thing we do is to say, when you look at science, it only makes sense if God is triune. And so we basically demonstrate how you got religions that say there's one and only one God manifested as a single person. And then that's Islam, for example, and Judaism. Then you've got Buddhism and Hinduism that says there's many gods out there, and all of them participate in different ways in creation. So the problem with the polytheistic religions is you got a lot of people messing with the soup.
Yeah.
And they all have different approaches and ideas. But when we look at the scientific record, it really does reveal a single plan, a single purpose, a single mind behind everything we see in nature. But the problem with Judaism and Islam is God's by himself before he creates anything. So they have no explanation for the origin of love. Love, by definition, requires at least one other person to express that love to or to receive love from.
Interesting.
And so what we see in Christianity, God is not compelled to create. You got the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit in a relationship with one another, so they're experiencing love to the fullest, receiving love, expressing love. Therefore, it's no big deal for them to create beings that also can experience and express love. The problem with Islam and Judaism, you've got this God who has no experience of expressing or receiving love, creating creatures that do. As I share with Muslims, one of their mantras is there's nothing greater than God. I says, well, you've got a problem with your theology, because here's God without any experience of love or any experience of expressing or receiving love, creating beings that do. In that context, we're greater than God.
Wow, that's interesting.
By chance, right?
Right.
He just created love by chance.
Or what you say is, in order for God to experience love, he was compelled to create. Whereas in Christianity...
So he had a deficiency in a way.
He had a deficiency that had to be corrected
by
creating. You don't see that in Christianity.
Interesting.
And so,
I love that
in that
argument.
sense, science only makes sense if God is a Trinity.
Yeah.
So you don't talk about manuscripts. You don't get into, like, let's say you're talking to an unbeliever and you mention that beautiful argument of love. To try to convince them of the Bible, you don't mention manuscripts or anything like that. What's your default
Well, I do.
for that?
They raise that question, but what I typically do is I say, okay, this is consistent with the Bible teaches. The space-time theorems, science only makes sense if God is triune. We got the fine-tuning argument. You need to look at the Bible and see what it's got to say. Now, you want to put it to the test. What's unique about the Bible, it's the only holy book in the major religions of the world that commands objective testing, and it does so repeatedly. Like what Paul said, test everything, hold fast to that which is good. So I basically challenge him, go through the Bible, put it to the test. Now, all the world's holy books make some attempt at predicting future science and predicting future historical events. The Bible has a perfect score. None of the other holy books do. Moreover, the Bible does it not just 2 or 3 times. You'll find over 1,000 predictions in the Bible of future events in human history. You'll find over 100 places where it predicts future scientific discoveries, and it gets it right 100% of the time. Now, can a human pull that off? No.
No.
That's how I came to Christ. I was not raised in a Christian home, but I went through a Gideon Bible and realized this book gets everything right, and it's predicting things thousands of years ahead of time. This has to be inspired by the one that actually created the universe. Moreover, it teaches doctrines we can't visualize from a human perspective. The Bible is alone in teaching the Trinity. A human on his own isn't going to come up with that kind of a concept. Or the one that really gets me is the Bible alone teaches that God has given us free will and is holding us accountable for all of our words, thoughts, and actions. Yet the Bible also teaches that before the universe existed, God predetermined everything I would say, everything I would do, everything I would think. How do you reconcile divine predetermination and human free will?
Yeah.
It can't be done in the context of the dimensions we experience, length, width, height, and time. But it can be done if we allow the God that the space-time theorems say can create space-time dimensions at will. So another book I wrote was called Beyond the Cosmos, where I got a whole chapter saying all we need to do is have God work in 3 independent dimensions of time. If he does, you can simultaneously have divine predetermination and human free will. The Bible is the only book that teaches that. And the Bible's doctrines of heaven and hell are also beyond what we human beings can visualize, which I took as evidence. This book did not come from a human source.
Yeah.
It came from one that transcends the limitations of our human visualization.
That's awesome. I'm here. Some of these arguments I'm hearing for the first time. I didn't know a couple of these. One thing that I think is really interesting is that you wrote a book on climate change.
Yes.
And I know it's a really hot topic in culture and in politics and things like that. So can you give us your take on what's going on in the climate?
Well, I basically wrote it as a part of my passion for writing books on fine-tuning, basically making the point that what's being overlooked in the climate debate is the fact that for a 10,000-year period, we've had extraordinary climate stability. And so climate stability is not the norm. It's the exception. We've only had it for the last 10,000 years. So most of the book talks about the degree of fine-tuning you need to have this window of extreme climate stability. And actually, since I've written the book, we now know that the climate is even more stable than we thought. I mean, there's a 1,000-year period from AD 900 to 1950 where the global mean climate did not vary by more than plus or minus 0.06 degrees centigrade. That's never happened in the history of planet Earth. But that explains why in that 1,000-year window you had such a radical advance in human technology and human population. That's when the population began to increase to a great degree and technology exploded. Explains the technology we have today. And from a biblical perspective, this makes sense. I mean, what Jesus said, I will return when you, my followers, take the good news of salvation to all the people groups of the world. For that to be happen in a relatively brief period of time, you need technology and you need people, lots of people. And this period of extreme climate stability facilitated that. So it's basically a book on fine-tuning, but it's also a book where I say, you know, the Bible tells us that he has put us in charge of planet Earth, and we're to manage it for our benefit and the benefit of all other life. And what bothers me about this climate debate is they're saying we have to make a choice between what's good for humanity and what's good for the planet and all the rest of planet's life. The Bible implies we will not have to make that kind of choice, that there will be solutions that are beneficial for us and beneficial for the planet and all life. So basically the challenge of what I wrote in the book is we need to pursue win-win solutions, not win-lose solutions, where one wins and the other loses. And moreover, I think a problem with the climate debate is they're not taking into account humans are sinners. And so trying to force the peoples of the world to cut their standard of living by a factor of 2 or 3, that's not going to work.
Right.
I mean, I talked to a bunch of my son's friends saying, you know, how about if we solve the climate crisis by getting rid of all of our technology and you getting by on a third of the income that you're earning right now?
Yeah.
I said, no, we'd rather that. Oh, no.
Yeah.
We're prepared for the climate.
Right. We will just choose to die.
Exactly. We're not going to worry about the next generation. So, and, you know, even say if Western Europe and North America were to make the big draconian sacrifices, what's to say the rest of the nations are going to follow?
Right.
Yeah.
People will cheat, and we've seen that. Whenever you try to pass laws that cripple people's economic well-being, a black market develops.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
people will find workarounds. So we need to find solutions to climate change that are going to boost the world's economy, not cripple the world economy. And I put about 40 ways in the book that we can do that.
Okay.
And in fact, I've just written an article, it's going to go up on our website, about how Asia, particularly Eastern Asia, is facing a major crisis from the burning of coal and wood and biomass, because it's putting huge amounts of particulate matter in the atmosphere. And in the Gangetic Valley, for example, they calculate that because of their current exposure to this particulate matter, that their life expectancy is being shortened by 8 years. In Delhi, it's 12 years.
Wow.
For all of Asia as a whole, it's 3 1/3 years.
Okay.
So, and that can easily be resolved by substituting the coal and the wood and the biomaterial with natural gas. Natural gas emits no particulate matter. And with natural gas, you get about half the greenhouse gas emissions, because natural gas is methane, CH4. When you burn CH4, you get water and you get carbon dioxide. But and both are greenhouse gases. But the thing about water vapor, it will precipitate out as rain and snow. So it's difficult to push the water vapor content up. Carbon dioxide is what you got to worry about. When you burn coal and wood, you're pumping lots of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Methane cuts that almost by a factor of 2. And And so it explains why the nations that have had the greatest success in cutting back on greenhouse gases have been those nations that have stopped burning coal and are burning natural gas instead.
Interesting.
That's Canada, United States, and Western Europe. But what concerned me is that our government has just said, we're going to put a halt on liquid natural gas ports because methane, natural gas, pumps greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And so they think they're doing the right thing. We're going to make sure that people aren't putting greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, but they're actually making the problem worse. They're basically forcing the Asians to continue burning coal and wood and biomaterials. While Asia doesn't have a lot of natural gas,
Okay.
North America is sitting on the world's largest reserves of natural gas. We got lots of natural gas. We can supply the entire world with natural gas, but it means getting the natural gas to them.
Yeah.
How do you do that? These big shipping containers that liquefy the natural gas and then ship it overseas. So we could easily supply India and China, the Philippines, Indonesia with natural gas. I think we ought to scale it up. Now, what I do say to people here that are worried about the fact that natural gas does put greenhouse gas in the atmosphere, it'll buy us the time we need to scale up nuclear, wind, and solar. In fact, I've written articles making the point we really need to pursue thorium nuclear reactors. They give you 300 times the energy of uranium nuclear reactors. It's impossible to use those reactors to make nuclear weapons. It's impossible of a meltdown. There's 3 times as much thorium in Earth's crust as there is uranium. It's much cheaper to mine. Thorium nuclear power actually has the potential to beat water power for inexpensive electricity.
Wow.
So, but it's going to take time
Right.
to scale that up.
Yeah.
And even if we go with solar and wind, we're a long ways from scaling it up where we can supply 100% of the world's energy needs from those sources.
Right.
Moreover, I'm concerned that they're not exactly ecologically friendly. And with solar, you're basically removing agricultural land and producing electricity instead.
Right.
Oh, you could use the deserts, but hey, you got a desert ecology you got to worry about. Wind, they kill birds, and they got to be maintained, which that's one reason why I think thorium is really the go-to way. But no matter which one you pursue, it's going to take time. Natural gas buys us the time we need. You get an immediate drop in greenhouse gases.
Yeah.
You eliminate the particulates, which means instead of having tens of millions of people dying from particulate matter pollution, they're now healthy.
Yeah.
So for health reasons alone, we need to do it.
I've always wondered, I've never been to China or any of those Eastern Asian countries, but anytime I see videos or pictures or anything of that nature, I do see some sort of smog, almost ever-present smog in the background. And I've always wondered if that's just the climate or if it's just a completely deregulated manufacturing or something of that nature. I've never
Well,
known.
I've been to both India and China, and it really is that bad.
Yeah.
So, in fact, this article that I got coming out in a couple of weeks, basically I show a photo, what it's like in Delhi.
Yeah.
And one of the photos is taken near the train station, the central train station. You can see people in front. The train station is about 200 feet away. You can't see it.
That's crazy.
You can't see the building.
That's crazy.
And I got another one which is taken, at about 11 a.m. And you see this brown gunk in the atmosphere. Then you see this little bright dot in the sky. That bright dot is the sun.
Wow, that's wild.
You can easily look.
So what is that from? Is that from the climate or
It's
from
from the
chemicals?
particulate matter pollution.
Yeah. And do you
Wow.
think it's from manufacturing? Because, for instance, we're here in LA, and I know that LA used to be notorious for smog, and then from what I understand, they introduced the catalytic converters to the cars, and that really reduced a lot of
Well,
the
they
smog.
also got rid of the steel mills.
Okay,
So
okay.
that made a big difference.
Yeah, so...
It ruined the astronomy, though.
Oh, really?
While Mount Wilson, which sits above the Los Angeles basin,
Uh-huh.
It depended on the smog to get excellent seeing conditions.
What? Oh, because it blocked out the light
Well,
underneath?
what it did, it stabilized the atmosphere above the smog layer.
Okay.
So when they cleaned up the smog, they said, oh, our stellar images aren't the quality that they used to be.
Interesting. That's so funny. So you win some, you lose some, I guess.
Yeah, right.
So would you say, after your studies, are you on board to say that humanity is causing us to sort of hurtle towards a catastrophic climate event, or
Okay, what I point out in the book, Weathering Climate Change, is that how we got this extreme stability. The natural cycles are cooling the planet. Human activity is warming the planet. And for a 9,500-year period, they almost perfectly balanced one another. And that's an extraordinary. I basically argued God had to be part of this because it's very difficult to perfectly balance those two. What's happened since 1950 is that technology has advanced at such an exponentially increasing pace that we're now ahead of the cooling. And so we're warming the planet much faster than the natural cycles are cooling it. But there's no doubt that humans are the factor. Because all the natural cycles are putting it in the opposite direction. If it wasn't for human activity, we'd be in an ice age already.
That's wild. And so you would be on board with saying we do need to change human action in some form in order to stop some sort of catastrophic event from happening.
Well, what you notice in the ice age cycle, global warming always brings on global cooling.
Okay.
What drives the ice age cycle is that you get a rise in temperature, and this happens when the tilt of our rotation axis goes from 22 to 24. That warms the planet up. And when the shape of our orbit around the sun becomes more elliptical, that warms the planet up. And the two are working together, you get a sharp rise in temperature. When it gets about 2 degrees centigrade above where it is now, it melts a significant part of the winter polar ice cap.
Okay.
And when that happens, the liquid water in the Arctic is reflecting sunlight with 6% efficiency. Ice reflects it with 60% efficiency. So it means the Arctic Ocean, when you melt away that ice, absorbs a lot of heat from the sun, and that creates snow, which falls on Canada and Siberia. And the only reason why we don't have thick ice sheets over Canada and Siberia today is that they're virtual deserts. They only get 10 inches of precipitation. And so, yes, it snows there in the wintertime, but the summer melts the snow that you get in the winter.
Right.
If you double or triple the winter snowfall, now you get ice accumulating. And it's quite rapid how quickly it becomes covered with thousands of feet of ice. And what we're now noticing is the summer polar ice cap is substantially melted away. Over half of it is gone. But there hasn't been much change in the winter polar ice cap.
Okay.
If you melt the solar ice cap, you get rain over Canada and Siberia, which isn't going to be a problem. If you melt the winter polar ice cap, you get snow.
Okay.
And with snow, you got a problem. And so that's the enigma. Warm the planet up, you get an ice age.
Yeah, that is so strange. It's almost counterintuitive. I didn't realize, and I'm not really schooled really well on this topic, but it's almost counterintuitive that the ice caps would be melting, therefore freezing other parts of the earth. I always thought the argument was that the ice caps would be melting and we wouldn't have ice for the polar bears, and the sea levels would rise, causing everybody to get flooded and have to move inland to the very center.
Well,
of
that
the
does
continent.
happen, but very
Okay.
quickly thereafter, you get an ice age.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
Is that all? Is that what? I mean,
Yeah, all this is in weather. And
okay,
climate
okay.
change.
So
Yeah.
this is what, and this is also what your pop culture politicians and media faces they're all worried about an ice age coming, or is that just something that you?
No, they're mainly worried about rising sea levels
Okay.
and worried about the polar bears not having the ice age.
Right.
So they're worried about the short-term consequences. I'm saying far worse than the short-term consequences of global warming are the long-term consequences.
Gotcha.
I mean, if we freeze 25% of the surface of the Earth, you got to move billions of people.
Right. Gotcha.
And so it's going to be and it's going to be catastrophic for the animals as well. I do point out, however, it's an ice age. We are in an ice age cycle.
Mm-hmm.
Our option is to delay it. We can't put it off. But if we do nothing, it could happen in 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
If we actually take this seriously, we can delay it by 1,000 to 1,500 years. And hey, if you're premillennial in your theology, you're going to need 1,000 years, right?
Good thing we're not.
point.
So
That's another debate you two.
yeah, we did have that. We had several.
Yeah.
Earlier we were talking about the weight of Neanderthal's brain compared to us. That normal brain weight is what, 3 pounds?
Yeah.
After talking to you, I'm convinced your brain must be 10 pounds.
Probably so.
Obviously.
You talk to my sons, they would argue.
Yeah.
I don't know whether you know this, but I'm on the autistic spectrum, and people on the spectrum tend to specialize in certain areas of knowledge.
Okay.
So there's huge areas where I know very little about.
Oh, yeah?
Okay.
I did not know
When
that.
it comes to the sciences,
But I definitely admire your knowledge. I admire the fact that you invited us here to your studio. This has been a fantastic time that we've had with you. I could just talk to you for another 10 hours if I had it.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for
You're welcome.
coming on.
Yeah, you mentioned lots of books that all sound really interesting. I've read, honestly, most of the books that you guys went. I'm kind of a Reasons to Believe nerd. But for folks who haven't read any of the books, could you tell them where they could find it?
Well, you can actually get free chapters. I've written 23 books, but I think there's 8 or 9 books where we give a chapter away for free.
Okay.
Reasons.org/Ross. If they go there, they can choose, several chapters of my books. Reasons.org is our website, and if you've been there, there's tens of thousands of articles. We have a YouTube channel that you can subscribe to, and there's thousands of videos that they can watch. Or if they want to have some fun, just go to YouTube and you can watch lots of debates we've done with both Christians and atheist scientists.
I know we're closing out here, and I'm sorry, but this is more of a personal question. So my wife and I homeschool our kids, and what I've noticed is that the science curriculum in the homeschool world is very saturated with young earth creationist curriculum. Do you guys have, or are you thinking about offering some sort of childhood curriculum in the sciences?
We have some. I mean, childhood curriculum is very time-consuming, expensive to produce. So we don't have the financial resources of the young earth creationists.
Yeah.
But we did have a biochemist who said, you know what, I'm homeschooling. And she wrote up a very nice curriculum for science.
Okay.
So she didn't have time to get into the other subjects. And so since we're a science organization, we said, hey, let's at least cover the science part of it.
Awesome.
So
And that's on your website as well?
I don't know exactly where it is. I mean, I'm just the founder. They don't tell me everything. But I do know it's available.
Okay.
There's a
Okay.
way to get it. If
Very
you put
interesting.
curriculum into our website search engine, I think it'll pop up for you.
Awesome.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I definitely want to check it out because, I respect young earth creationists. I respect theistic evolutionists. I think I land mostly with Reasons to Believe. And the curriculum is slim for me to pick for teaching my children what I believe is the truth. And
Well,
so,
what I've done with our kids is basically train them
Mhm.
how to teach themselves.
yeah.
And what's interesting is that there's all these online resources, but the thing is you need to train children how to use these resources.
Yeah.
For example, I tell them, you see a popular article on the internet and they don't give you a link to the peer-reviewed scientific articles, don't trust it.
Yeah.
So
Well,
so
everybody, Dr. Hugh Ross from Reasons to Believe, we want to thank you so much for coming on today. And, of course, we want you to hit that subscribe button. We want you to hit that follow button on the Bible Dingers YouTube channel. If you want to know about what we do, you can go ahead and go to BibleDingers.com, and you can read all about our ministry. You could also follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and now X at Bible Dingers across the board. And make sure you go and hit that follow button. Most importantly, ding on.